Good morning, and welcome to the fourth webinar in the Expanding CalFresh to People with SSI Policy webinar series. This webinar is a policy refresher on CalFresh eligibility rules for authorized representatives. My name is Alexis Fernandez, and I'm the Chief of the CalFresh Policy Bureau here at the California Department of Social Services, CalFresh and Nutrition Branch, as well as your host for today's webinar. Before we begin, let's go over some logistics. Today's webinar will be in listen-only mode, which means you can connect your audio via your phone or computer, but all lines will be muted during the presentation. Which brings me to my next logistical detail. How do you ask questions? You can ask questions by using the question pane feature on the right-hand side of your screen. We will have a limited time for questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible, but if we don't get to your question during the live presentation, don't worry. We are keeping track of all questions submitted and will follow up as needed. If you've joined us on previous webinars, we're still working on posting those Q&A documents, but they will be up over the next couple of weeks as we wrap up the series. All right, today is the fourth webinar in the Expanding CalFresh to People Receiving SSI series. We have one webinar left in the policy series after today. That webinar will be on Tuesday, March 19th, and will provide an introduction to the American with Disabilities Act, or ADA, and the provision of reasonable accommodations. If you've joined us throughout the series, you'll notice a slight content change for that upcoming webinar. Let me just take a minute to let you know that we had originally planned to provide some reasonable accommodation best practice highlights. But as we began developing the content for that webinar, realized that a back to basics level set would be useful to set the baseline for future best practice content. Therefore, we'll be providing an introduction to the American with Disabilities Act and the provision of reasonable accommodations in the context of the CalFresh program and what is required under the program. We'll cover best practices in the future. If you haven't yet registered, you can do so on our webpage at cdss.ca.gov/CalFresh SSI. You can also find materials, including the slides and the recording of this webinar, as well as those from previous webinars on the webpage. All right, with that, let's get started by reviewing today's agenda. Today we'll begin with some background on the policy change that will expand CalFresh to people receiving SSI benefits. We'll then provide general information on authorized representatives, including the roles that an authorized representative can play in the context of CalFresh. We will then dive into the topic in more detail, reviewing how an authorized representative may be designated, who is and isn't allowed to serve as an authorized representative, responsibilities of authorized representatives, the households, and the counties, when designating an AR and fulfilling the role of an AR. We're also going to touch on designating an emergency authorized representative for the purpose of obtaining benefits in an emergency situation. And lastly, we'll discuss application assisters and their role as related to authorized representatives. And lastly, as we've done in our previous webinars, we'll highlight some additional resources available to you, and we'll have a question and answer session. Okay, and before I get started, I'm seeing that my screen has not been sharing properly, so let me just double check here. I think you should have the agenda up. Confirming, and it looks like we're back with screen sharing. So if you have any logistical issues, write them in via the chat box as well. We're monitoring that. Let me just make sure I can change slides. Perfect, I think we're good. Okay. So let's start by reviewing the upcoming policy change that will expand CalFresh to people that are receiving SSI benefits. California's cash-out policy started in 1974 when the federal government began the combined federal-state SSI-SSP program. At that time, states were allowed to increase the SSP portion of the grant instead of administering what was then known as the food stamp program. California opted for this quote-unquote cash-out policy and increased the monthly SSP grant by $10. Back then, this change made sense. It was an efficient way to get food benefits to an eligible population. Under the cash-out policy, SSI recipients have been ineligible for CalFresh food benefits because, in theory, they were already receiving the value of benefits within their SSP grant. The challenge is that over time, the value of CalFresh benefits has increased with the rate of inflation, while the SSI cash-in amount has remained flat and lost relative value. This means that many SSI recipients living on very limited budgets intended to cover all their basic needs are likely to have unmet food needs, but are unable to apply for CalFresh. Things are changing. Assembly Bill 1811, the fiscal year 1819 state budget, reversed the policy known as cash out. This means that people receiving SSI SSP will be able to apply for CalFresh on or after June 1, 2019. If they're otherwise eligible, they will be able to receive food benefits. There will be no change to the combined SSI SSP benefit amount as a result of this policy change. So individuals receiving SSI will keep their current monthly benefit and will be able to apply for CalFresh. For the purposes of determining CalFresh eligibility, all SSI recipients will be considered elderly and or disabled. For more information on eligibility rules for households with members who are elderly and or disabled, check out our previous webinar on the topic. It's also posted to our webpage. Beginning June 1, 2019, a large influx of newly eligible SSI recipients are expected to apply for CalFresh. Given that all SSI recipients are either aged, blind, disabled, or a combination of the above, use of authorized representatives is expected to increase, as an AR can be particularly useful in supporting these individuals to apply for and use their benefits. Therefore, we're going to take this opportunity to review the CalFresh authorized representative rules. Before we leave this slide, I'll just make one more plug for our webpage. I'm like a broken record. You can find not only all the slides and recordings from this webinar and previous webinars, but also a lot of information and policy guidance on the policy change. Okay, now that we're all on the same page, let's get to it. How is an authorized representative for the purposes of CalFresh defined? A CalFresh authorized representative, or AR, is I'm sorry, let me just pause here to make sure I'm getting another note about the screen sharing. Can you see it there? Okay, we'll keep going. Sorry about that. A CalFresh authorized representative, or AR, is an adult non-household member who may be authorized to act on behalf of a household to complete the application process, to obtain CalFresh benefits, and also to use CalFresh benefits. An AR is an individual who isn't part of the CalFresh household, but may, for example, include a relative, a friend, or someone else who knows enough about the household to act on their behalf. Today we are talking about authorized representatives in the context of the impending expansion of CalFresh to people who receive SSI. But I want to make sure that I am clear, today's presentation covers AR policy generally. Any CalFresh household may designate an AR. This is not limited to households with SSI recipients or households with an elderly and or disabled member. So when we're talking about it in context of the upcoming change, be sure to understand that these AR rules apply to all households. A quick note and a bit of a flashback to a recent webinar. There are special rules for employees of institutions such as group living arrangements and drug addiction and alcohol treatment centers. So for more information on those rules, especially anything unique to authorized representatives, see our previous webinar on eligibility rules for residents of institutions. If you weren't able to attend live, the materials and the recording are posted on our site. We'll talk a little bit more on group living arrangement and DEA center residents as we move through this slideshow as well. Okay, So what can an authorized representative do? We mentioned that an authorized representative can apply for, obtain, and use benefits for the household. What might this include? So an authorized representative can apply for and complete the interview for the household. An authorized representative can complete and submit forms for the household, such as work registration forms, SAR-7, recertification, or any other required form. An AR can receive CalFresh notices. An AR can report changes in the household's income or other circumstances. An AR can also use the EBT card to purchase the household's food. An AR may be designated to do all of these things or only some of them, which also means that multiple people can be designated as an AR to fulfill different responsibilities on behalf of a single household. So for example, a household may select one particular individual to be designated as the AR for the purpose of completing the application and interview, but that same household may select another individual to act as an AR for the purpose of using their food benefits. Another example, a household may only use an authorized representative to use benefits, but may be able to complete the application and all their reporting requirements on their own. So who can be designated as an authorized representative? An AR may be any of the following: an adult non-household member designated by the head of the household, the spouse, or other responsible member who has sufficient knowledge of relevant household circumstances. Acting as an AR carries a lot of responsibilities, so it is important that an individual designated as an AR have, and it's bolded on our slide, sufficient knowledge of relevant household circumstances. Basically, the individual needs to know enough about the household and the household circumstances to meet program requirements, such as accurate completion of required forms and completing required reports. An AR can also be a disqualified individual who is the only adult living in the household. The most common reason for this disqualification is an IPV, and if they're the only adult living in the household, they can act as the AR under certain circumstances. Other reasons for the disqualification might be related to, for example, a time-limited sanction, but again, if they are the only adult living in the household and only minor persons are left in the household, they may act as an AR. An authorized representative can be an individual representing more than one household, and an AR does not need to be a formal guardian for the people in the CalFresh household to act as their AR. Now that we know who can act as an AR and what they can do, let's talk about how an AR is designated into that role by the household. A household's CalFresh information is confidential, so not just anyone can walk into a county office and get info about a CalFresh case or application, and not just anyone can walk in and complete a report. If a household wants someone outside of their household to be able to act on their behalf, they need to properly designate that person as the authorized representative. The process of designating the AR protects the household and the county. So how is this important process completed? Like many other things in CalFresh, the process of designating an AR may be completed in person, over the phone, or online. Either way, the AR must provide proof of identity when designated as the AR. As well, a signature needs to be collected. So if this process were to be completed over the phone, for example, the county would either need to have the technology to use an electronic signature or would need to send out that designation form, which we're going to talk more about. The county cannot require a household to designate an AR. So the process of designating an AR is something that the household voluntarily chooses to do. As we mentioned earlier, a household may name one or more ARs depending on what responsibilities the household needs them to fulfill. Also note that if an individual is acting for the household in another capacity, for example, they are an SSI recipient's designated payee, or they have power of attorney over a applicant, the individual must still be explicitly designated as the household's CalFresh AR, because an authorized representative for purposes of CalFresh is separate and apart from those other roles the individual may play. Once a household designates an authorized representative, the AR may act as the AR through the length of the CalFresh certification period. At recertification, the household can either choose to keep that same AR or make a change. That said, if needed, a household may make a change to their authorized representative designation at any time. Some things come up during the cert period and you may need to make a change, or maybe that AR has moved out of town and is no longer able to act on that capacity, but remember, they can make a change at any time if needed. The following forms can be used to designate an AR. These are kind of the most common forms. And at application, the household can designate an AR on the SAS 1 or SAS 2+. Households can also use the CalFresh only application, the CS 285. At recertification, they can reaffirm or change their existing AR designation using the same SAS 1, SAS 2, CF 37. As you know, a signature is required to complete these forms. A wet or electronic signature on any of these forms is sufficient to complete the AR designation. Let's take a quick look at an example. This is a screenshot pulled from the SAS 2+. It's a copy of the question that allows the household to designate an AR. So this is question 2, and it says, you may authorize someone 18 years or older to help your household with your CalFresh benefits. This person can also speak for you at the interview, help you complete forms, shop for you, and report changes for you. You will have to repay benefits you may get by mistake because of information this person gives to the county, and any benefits you didn't want them to spend will not be replaced. If you are an authorized representative, you will need to give the county proof of identity for yourself and the applicant. After explaining that, the form asks, do you want to name someone to help you with your CalFresh case? Yes or no? And if the person filling out the form answers yes, there is a space to provide the name and contact information of the authorized representative. In addition to the SAS 1, SAS 2+, the 285, and the 37, the county may use a separate form developed for the purpose of designating an AR. If this option is selected, the form must be sent to CDSS for approval before it can be used. As well, the household always has the option to provide a signed written statement to the county designating the AR. And this can really be a pretty short and simple note that the household would like to designate an individual to act as their authorized representative. We've talked about who can act as an authorized representative and how they should be designated. Now we're going to talk about some AR restrictions and disqualifications. All right. AR restrictions on county employees. Any county employee who works in determining CalFresh eligibility or issuing CalFresh benefits may not act as an authorized representative. There are a couple of exceptions to this rule. A county employee can serve as an AR if both of the following are true. There is specific written approval of a designated county official. So there's someone at the county who's an official determining that no one else is able to serve as an AR. So only if the county employee is sort of the AR of last resort and there is a county official who has approved that designation can the county employee act as an AR. Like all other ARs, the county must determine whether this is an individual, the county employee, has been designated as an AR to apply on behalf of the household or to obtain benefits on behalf of the household. Okay. AR restrictions on employees of authorized retailers. People who work for grocery stores, meal service providers, or other F&S authorized retailers may not act as an authorized representative. Again, the exception is that the county determines no one else is available to act as the authorized representative. So, similar to county employees, an employee of an authorized retailer can only act as an AR if they are sort of the last individual left to play that role. And again, like all other ARs, you must determine what role they're going to play on behalf of the household. For example, applying for the household or obtaining benefits for the household. Okay, the next restriction is on individuals with an IPV. An individual disqualified from CalFresh for an intentional program violation cannot act as an AR during the period of disqualification unless the individual is the only member, or rather only adult member of the household, and the county determines that no one is available to act as the AR, or no one else is available to act as the AR. We mentioned this during our last webinar, but I'll reaffirm it here. There is an AR restriction on homeless meal providers. Homeless meal providers, such as a group kitchen or shelter that accepts CalFresh benefits, cannot be an AR under any circumstance. Okay, so let's talk about AR disqualification. So when would a person who was acting as an AR no longer be allowed to play that role? If an AR knowingly misrepresents a household's circumstances by providing false information or saying things that aren't true on purpose, or if they use the CalFresh benefits in ways that they aren't supposed to, an AR can be disqualified from serving as an AR for up to 1 year. Okay. Next, we're going to discuss household, county, and AR responsibilities. So what are the responsibilities of an authorized representative? And we've talked about these already, but I'll just mention them here again so that they're clear. An AR must be knowledgeable about the household circumstances. The AR's responsibilities include, but are not limited to, knowledge of the household's income, resources, expenses, and household composition. That information is needed to accurately represent or act on behalf of the household. ARs are responsible for providing accurate information and must maintain confidentiality. What are the household responsibilities? Ultimately, a household is responsible for the actions of an authorized representative and the impact on benefits, which is why it is important when a household is designating an AR that the household understand that the AR should be familiar enough with their circumstances to provide accurate information to the county. For example, and we've highlighted the sentence that we read earlier from the SAW 2+. A household is responsible if they receive an overissuance of benefits due to information provided or not provided by the authorized representative. The household may need to pay those benefits back, just as if they had been acting on their own behalf and information was or wasn't provided as required. The county must inform the household of this responsibility. That is why it's on forms like the SAW 2+. There is an exception to this rule. If an AR is an employee of an institution, such as a group living arrangement or a DAA treatment center, and the employee has been designated by the institution to act as an AR on behalf of residents, the AR is responsible for the overissuance in that limited circumstance. Again, you can go back to the webinar from a couple of weeks ago to get more info on the specific AR rules for residents of institutions. Okay, what are the county responsibilities? Counties must ensure that ARs are properly designated and that they, the county, retain the name of the AR in the household case file along with their contact information. Counties must ensure that limits are not placed on the number of households an authorized representative may represent. And counties should train their staff on AR policies so that authorized representative processes are implemented consistently across the county. Okay, we've talked a lot about authorized representatives designated for the purpose of applying for CalFresh and for regularly obtaining and using benefits. Now I want to touch on a related but somewhat unique concept, and that is emergency ARs. An emergency AR can be designated for the purpose of obtaining benefits in case something unanticipated happens to the household. A household may designate an emergency AR to obtain the household's benefits for a particular month. To do so, the county needs both the signature of the authorized representative, the emergency AR, and the signature of a responsible household member. CalFresh households may name an emergency AR in case of, for example, an unforeseen illness or other circumstance. If the household did not designate an emergency AR at initial certification or recertification, a household may do so in writing, again, with the signature of both the AR and a responsible member of the household. They can use a form such as the Temp 2201, which is on the screen now. They can use a separate form developed by the county if it has been approved by CDSS, or they can also use a written and signed statement. So one of the things about emergency ARs is that it's obviously more efficient to have identified that person before the unforeseen circumstance or illness occurs, so that the county is aware of who may step in to obtain benefits for the household during that emergency. So one thing to consider would be to name that emergency AR even before you know whether or not you'll need them in the future, so that the county has that information available to them already in case of that unforeseen circumstance. And before we wrap up today, one final note on application assisters that are funded through SNAP outreach funding. While application assisters serve a very essential role helping clients complete the CalFresh application process, application assisters that are funded through SNAP outreach cannot act as authorized representatives. Okay, so our takeaway for today is that on June 1st, 2019, a large influx of newly eligible SSI, SST recipients are expected to apply for CalFresh. As all SSI, SSP recipients are age, blind, disabled, or a combination, all tools and best practices to provide service to this population, including the use of authorized representatives, should be considered. You can find more information and review guidance on the policy change, as well as an upcoming all-county letter on the topic, which will reiterate what we've covered today for our county partners and other stakeholders on our website. You can also email questions to CalFresh SSI@dss.ca.gov. In addition to our webpage and your ability to email us anytime, we'll now go over a few other resources. Don't forget, March 19th is the 5th webinar in our series, which will now provide an introduction to the American with Disabilities Act and reasonable accommodations. If you haven't already registered, we encourage you to do so. You're also invited to join us to our Reversing SSI, new name, our Expanding CalFresh to recipients of SSI all stakeholder meeting on March 13th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. All the info again is on our website, as well as a registration link. You can join us in person, by phone, or via webinar. And finally, a list of some relevant policy guidance that's also on our website, but is compiled here for your convenience. And again, I'll just put a plug in for coming soon, an all-county letter on CalFresh authorized representatives, providing some of the guidance we've discussed here today. So we've come to our question and answer session. if you give us a minute, we'll organize ourselves and start getting a sense of what has come in terms of questions. You can also submit your questions via the chat box while we do that. So let me just see what we have here in terms of questions. Okay, so here's a good one to get us started. We mentioned that the authorized representative can complete the CalFresh intake interview. The question is, does the applicant need to be present for this intake interview as well? And the answer is no. The household has designated the AR for that purpose. So the AR is able to fully act on behalf of the household, which means they can attend the interview either by phone or in person on behalf of the household. So the applicant does not need to be present, so long as that AR has been designated before the interview is complete. Okay, this next question is about authorized representatives and their ability to act in the role of using benefits on behalf of the household. This question just asks for clarification kind of the overlap with EBT policy, and specifically, the guidance you generally receive that a household shouldn't give out their EBT card information like the PIN number. So again, the key here is that the authorized representative, the individual that has taken on that role, has been designated to act on behalf of the household. So if an individual has been designated as an AR for the purpose of obtaining and using benefits for the household, then that person is allowed to use the EBT card. That's their role on behalf of the household. But you're right, in general, households should not be giving out their PIN information. This is narrowly in the circumstance that an individual has been designated for that specific role. Okay. This next question, when is it okay for a minor to be assigned as an authorized representative? The authorized representative role is limited to responsible adults or adult non-household members. That individual also has to be designated by adult household member or responsible adult member of the household. So you do have to be an adult to act as an authorized representative. Okay. This next question, is an AR allowed to sign the Star 7 for a customer? So again, so long as an individual has been properly designated to act on behalf of the household, one of the roles that an AR can fulfill is to report on behalf of the household. That includes completing required forms such as the Star 7, the recertification form. It also includes making required reports, for example, income received over the income reporting threshold. So the short answer is yes, an AR can sign required forms if it has been designated for that role. We did receive here just kind of some feedback on having standard state forms, and that would be helpful, and thank you for that. It's one of the things that we've sort of started thinking about as we've started drafting the all-county letter here is providing forms for these different purposes so that there is consistency across the state. So we are looking at what forms need to be updated, making sure that the authorized representative designation is available throughout the entire certification period. So thank you. Here's a good question. So if the AR designation is made over the phone, I mentioned that you still need to request the proof of identity for the authorized representative, and you still need to collect a signature on the form as you would when you're completing lots of tasks over the phone. So the question here is what type of technology would be useful? We've heard of counties using document scanning technology, technology that allows clients to take pictures of their proof of identity. This will be a very similar process to how you collect any other verification from a client. They can submit a photocopy. I mean, really, there's a variety of options. Definitely completing as many tasks as you can while you're with the client over the phone for that kind of one and done model is a great approach. So if you're able to receive documentation through a document submission tool, a scanning tool, that would work in terms of submitting the proof of identity, just like you would receive other forms of verification. Okay, give us a moment to organize ourselves here. We'll get to some other questions. So just getting back to proof of identity, is the AR's proof of identity always required? Yes. So when you designate the AR, you need to get the AR's proof of identity, their contact info, so you know how to get a hold of them. That applies regardless of how the designation is made, over the phone, on paper, in a written statement, etc. Okay, there are some questions which we're going to need some additional clarification from the asker, so let me just organize myself here. Okay, here's one question. Can a legal immigrant sponsor be named as an AR? Yes, if they are not considered part of the household. So long as they are a responsible adult, knowledgeable about the household circumstances, and they're not part of the CalFresh household, then yes, they can be designated as an authorized representative. Okay, give us a minute here to keep going through these questions. Okay. Okay, here's another one. Can an authorized representative be someone other than a payee? I assume this is specific to designated payees for SSI, and we did mention that if a designated payee acts as an authorized representative, they still have to go through the process of being designated as an AR for CalFresh purposes. Also, an SSI recipient who applies for CalFresh after June 1 may have one individual who's their CalFresh authorized representative and a completely different individual who's their designated payee for SSI purposes. It does not need to be the same person. Ooh, okay, we've got lots more questions, I'll tell you now, than we're going to be able to get to today. We are keeping track, trying to go through to find out if there are any that are specific to the upcoming change. So just give us a minute here to keep going through these questions. Okay, so there is just a question here about the SNAP outreach funded application assisters and why they cannot be an authorized representative. That is per federal guidance, so not something that we made up in California, but rather guidance received from the Food and Nutrition Service. So those assisters that are funded through SNAP outreach cannot act as ARs. Okay, we did get some questions here about folks who may not have the capacity to designate an AR, and I'll say now we'll have to do some additional research about that, but that's a great topic to address in the all-county letter how to deal with folks who may not be able to designate an AR and what the best practice would be there. So we will, got in those questions. We're going to have to follow up with folks on that, possibly through the all-county letter. Oh my gosh, okay. Okay. We have gotten a lot of questions. I'm having just a hard time going through these, so give me just another minute here. Okay. Can a written statement signed by both or provided by the household specifying the AR designation be accepted for ongoing AR duties, or is this only for designation of an emergency AR? So a written statement provided by the household can be accepted for both an emergency AR due to those unforeseen circumstances, or for designation of an AR at any time. So that is always an option to designate an AR. Okay, here's another question about ARs and application assisters. Do application assisters need to use an AR form, or can they continue to use a signed release of information? This is an important question because I want to distinguish between a couple things. First, the application assister rules for not being an AR are specific to SNAP outreach funded ARs, or rather, SNAP outreach funded application assisters. They cannot act as an AR. The authorized representative role is separate and apart from signed release of information document where you are using the information to assist the person to complete to have them complete their authorization, their application. You're not acting as an AR, you're rather allowed to see information about the case. So I just want to emphasize those are two different things. And again, the application assister limitations are for SNAP outreach funded assisters. Okay. Okay, we're getting some duplicate questions here, so we'll organize these. On the topic of the question and answer, some have rightfully noticed that the Q&As are not yet posted. Those are coming. They're going through our internal review process here to make sure that we've answered all the questions correctly, especially those that require additional research after the presentation. So those are coming. Do check back soon. Okay, here's another, this is another one related to the upcoming change. Can a parent of a minor receiving SSI apply for the child living in the same household? Well, first, if the parent and the SSI recipient are in the same cook and prepare household, after June 1st, 2019, they would all be included members of the household. If the parent is not able to be a member of the household for some other reason, maybe the parent themselves are not eligible to CalFresh and they are excluded from the household, they don't have to act as an AR because they are the parent of the child. So again, I think remembering the unique role of an AR as someone who's acting on behalf of the household because there are no other adult household members in the CalFresh household to play that role. So excluded parents who are excluded for whatever reason don't need to be designated as ARs. They are technically in the cook and prepare household. They're just excluded for eligibility purposes. So lots of complicated scenarios here, but remembering kind of the purpose of the AR to step in when another adult is not available. Can CalFresh notices be sent to the AR? Yes, they can. Again, if that AR is helping the client apply for and maintain benefits, then yes, they can receive notices. Estimated date for the ACL, we have that out with our counties for review, and we're hoping to send it to other stakeholders as well to try to get that published before June 1st. So trying to get that out, though, we've gotten lots of really useful questions from this webinar that we'll have to incorporate into the ACL, so we may need a couple of weeks more time to build those in. Okay, I am looking at this list. We've got a lot of very complicated questions. Some are duplicates. Some we're going to need some additional clarification. So we will get to those. I'm going to give folks a chance for a couple other questions to come in so we have those tracked for us. But we are going to be wrapping up in just a minute here. Okay, we did get one other question about IHSS, and I've got to tell you, and you know what, we'll come back to that with folks because we need a lot more detail for some of these questions to make sure we're understanding the question. But in general, the question is whether an AR is, if a household is responsible for theft of benefits by an authorized representative. If a household designates an authorized representative and that authorized rep misuses benefits or uses them in a way that the household was not aware of, we cannot return the benefits to the household. The household will need to take steps to change that designation, make sure the person is no longer acting as their AR, but the household is responsible for how their benefits are used while they have an AR, as well as whether the AR provides or maybe doesn't provide required information, and if that leads to an overissuance, the household is responsible. So that's why it's really important that when designating an AR, folks understand the expectation that they be aware of the household circumstances. Okay. So we, like I said, have lots of questions here. We're going to be working through them. And again, we'll be following up lots more content for the ACL. We'll also be reaching out to some folks for clarification to make sure we understand what you're asking. But for today, we're going to wrap up. Again, keep an eye out for those additional resources, and we will continue to develop guidance in this area because we definitely got more questions than we had anticipated. That's a good thing. So thanks everyone for joining us today. If anything else comes up, do reach out to us via the CalFresh SSI at dss.ca.gov inbox, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks everybody.